At the beginning of the 17th century, a new power challenged the Chinese Ming dynasty. The mobile and powerful troops of this new contender, the later Manchu, caused major difficulties for the Chinese armies. Only after several defeats did they find a way to stand up to them. They equipped their border fortresses with Western-style artillery. But would this new weapon be enough to ward off the threat from the north? In this video, we look at how Western artillery influenced the war between the Ming and Qing, and ultimately proved a decisive factor in this clash of dynasties. In the northeast of China, a region that combines the heat of the tropics, the cold of Siberia, and the barrenness of the steppe, a new power emerged around 1600. Like Genghis Khan united the Mongols, a prince named Nurhaci united the Jurchen people of the region. Because not all the tribes joined him voluntarily, he tried to gain the support of China by placing himself under the overlordship of the Ming. Nurhaci proved to be a loyal vassal until 1615, but when he had subjugated almost all of the Jurchen, he proclaimed his own dynasty, the later Jin dynasty, and published a manifesto known as 7 Grievances against the Ming. In doing so, he declared war on his former overlord. The Ming responded by sending a punitive mission to the north, which encountered Nurhaci's troops in the Battle of Sarhu in spring of 1619. The Chinese army wanted to attack Hetuala, the later capital of the Qing, from 4 sides to besiege and capture it. But the attack was doomed to fail. Du Song, the general approaching directly from the west, rushed forward carelessly and was ambushed at the Hun River. Just as his troops crossed the river, Nurhaci's men broke a dam further upstream, using the spring tide to split Du Song's army in two. Then they easily defeated the 2 isolated groups. The other 3 parts of the Chinese army didn't fare much better. The troops coming from the southeast were ambushed while crossing a pass, while those on the northernmost route were overrun in their fortified camp, and those attacking from the southernmost route, now isolated, had to retreat too. In other battles too, the Ming found that their troops struggled with Nurhaci's armies. According to the historian Paul Lococo, the Jurchen's success was due to the so-called 8 banners, an administrative system that encompassed all the families under their rule. Each banner had to provide a certain number of troops. In battle, these were divided into Niru, companies of 200 to 300 men, consisting mainly of cavalry. As a result, they were very mobile and could inflict severe damage on the Ming troops through quick maneuvers and sudden assaults. To cope with the Jurchen, the Wanli Emperor decided to use artillery as a force multiplier. He ordered 300 heavy and 1,000 light guns, and distributed them to the most important border fortresses to create a defensive zone. Initially, this brought little success. Although the Jurchen struggled with protracted sieges, they skillfully used their superior mobility. They succeeded several times in luring the defenders out of their positions and confronting them on terrain where they had an advantage. For example, when capturing the vital border town of Shenyang in 1621, they overpowered several small forts by surrounding the countryside, set up a fortified camp a few kilometers from the city, and began plundering the area. When the defenders left the safety of their walls to drive them back, a battle ensued, and the commander of the defenders was killed with 5 arrows. Without their leader, the men of Shenyang had little to offer in reply to the Jurchen storm assaults. The city of Liaoyang and around 70 fortified towns east of the Liao River suffered a similar fate. The historian Nicolas di Cosmo assumes that Nurhaci's attacks were so effective because the Ming initially set up their cannons outside the city walls, which seems to have been, for whatever reason, a common practice at the time. At least, this is how pictures from this period show the use of artillery, such as this one depicting the defense of Liaoyang. If this was indeed the case, the cannons were exposed and the Jurchen could take them out with a skillful assault. Only when the Ming positioned the cannons on the walls, as they did in the Battle of Ningyuan in 1626, did their strategy lead to success. The Ming had not yet optimized this method of deploying artillery. Because of this, they sought outside support. Important officials who had converted to Catholicism and had close contact with the Jesuit missionaries in China used their connections to engage Western experts. For example, Minister Zhu Guanqi campaigned vigorously for the involvement of Western instructors. After a considerable back and forth, in 1623, he received permission to bring experts to Beijing and have them train his men. Unfortunately, however, an exploding cannon killed a Portuguese artilleryman and some spectators during a demonstration, renewing the government's skepticism. Only when a second convert, the military commissioner Sun Wanhua, who was stationed in Shandong province near the Manchurian border, managed to convince the Minister of War, Sun Chenzong, that more modern artillery was the only way to win the war, did the Ming embark on a large-scale modernization program. Zhu Guanqi's Western experts trained 8,000 artillerymen over 3 months, and the government produced numerous new guns. More and more of these guns were Western-style artillery. The Chinese had first encountered these weapons around 100 years earlier. They called the light mobile guns used in battles and on ships Frankish guns, and the gigantic slow guns used in fixed positions and sieges red barbarian cannons, named after the hair color of the British and Dutch who first brought them to China. Although Chinese guns were technologically quite sophisticated, the Ming military engineers realized that the Western weapons were more efficient than their own, and began buying and copying them. The effectiveness of the new Western cannons in the hands of trained men was demonstrated shortly after in the Battle of Ningyuan. In 1625, the Ming called a complete halt to risky offensive actions and ordered all troops north of the Great Wall of China to the south. As a result, the city of Ningyuan became an isolated but essential outpost. It was defended by around 20,000 men, with an extensive artillery park, including 11 brand new Portuguese guns, which were no longer positioned in front of the wall but rather on top of it. Nurhazi's troops, not expecting the increased firepower, ran into a deadly volley from the defenders on their first advance. They then tried to storm the city 3 more times, but neither ladders and battering rams, nor cavalry and chariots were of any use to them. They were beaten back repeatedly, suffered heavy losses from the cannons, and finally had to retreat. This battle was Nurhazi's first major defeat in the war, and his last. He was hit by a cannonball and died a few weeks later from the injury. The Ming were now fully convinced of the effectiveness of the new cannons. They further expanded their defensive system and used their modern artillery to decimate numerous attacking armies. The Jurchen had also come to understand that they could not win the war with their traditional methods. Although they were still superior to the Ming in open field battle, they were severely disadvantaged in extended sieges. Without sieges, however, they would never be able to conquer China. Therefore, Nurhazi's son and successor, Hong Taiji, also changed his strategy. He prepared his troops specifically for siege warfare and expanded the traditional 8 banners by creating 8 more banners from the allied Mongolian tribes and integrating Chinese soldiers into his army. According to the historian Paul Okoko, this was the most decisive adjustment of this reform. The Chinese troops were recruited from among conquered garrisons and volunteers, who became increasingly numerous thanks to Jurchen propaganda. They presented themselves as restorers of order and wanted to get rid of the corrupt Ming government and establish a new, purified China, hence the later name Qing, which precisely translates to pure. Soon, many Chinese joined Hong Taiji, and he was able to form a Chinese contingent, the old Han Army. These troops were mainly foot soldiers, which suited the Jurchen because they always had too few infantry, the type of unit particularly important during sieges. At the same time, Hong Taiji began to catch up with the Ming regarding artillery. He acquired as many guns as possible and recruited experts from the newly conquered Korea to produce more. In 1631, he had around 40 cannons operated by the artillerymen among the newly recruited Chinese. The first major battle in which Hong Taiji's reformed army was called to action was the Battle of Dailing, in autumn of 1631. Dailing was one of 3 fortress towns that formed the northernmost point of the Chinese defensive line. When Hong Taiji's troops reached the town, he did not let them attack directly, as his father had usually done, but ordered them to enclose the town and the defenses in front of it. Dailing was surrounded by 100 small forts, forming a defensive zone. Once the circumvallation was complete, Hong Taiji had his cannons raise the forts to the ground one by one. At the same time, he used his cavalry to ensure they were not surprised by Chinese forces. When he defeated a relief army of around 40,000 men near the Hsia River in October, and the most significant fort surrendered a few weeks later, Dailing capitulated. Hong Taiji's tactics were very successful. He had conquered one of the most important Chinese border fortresses. The guns that fell into the hands of the Jurchen at Dailing became the starting point for their first proper artillery units. After the battle, Hong Taiji hired experts to train his artillerymen and produce new guns. Hidden in the deep forests of Manchuria, a professional artillery corps with hundreds of guns was established very quickly. Together with the other reformed troops, it formed a modern, powerful army. Whether it was a match for the Ming armies would soon become apparent. In 1636, Hong Taiji officially claimed the imperial throne. He proclaimed the Qing dynasty, formally named his people Manchu, and began an aggressive war of conquest. The years 1641 and 1642 saw the Battle of Songjin, which is often considered the decisive clash in the struggle between the two dynasties. The battle was fought over the cities of Songshan and Jinsu. The Qing had already tried several times to conquer these strategically important border fortresses, but had repeatedly failed due to the superior firepower of the defenders. The Ming were, therefore, confident that they could repel this attack as they had all the others. They had no idea how powerful Hong Taiji's new artillery corps really was. The Qing came from the north and first surrounded the city of Jinsu. They built extensive siege works to keep all Ming forces at a distance and intercept all supplies. Because of this, Hong Taiji was not impressed when a relief army under Hong Chengchu, the Minister of War himself, arrived south of the city in the fall of 1641, and around 60,000 men took up positions near Mount Rufeng. His troops were ready and waiting behind massive field fortifications with loaded cannons. When Hong Chengchu's men attacked, they were greeted by a hail of bullets. Nevertheless, they assaulted the defenses for several hours, allowing Hong Taiji to lead some of the men to his rear. When the Ming soldiers realized the enemy was behind them, chaos ensued. In a desperate fighting retreat, around 10,000 of them escaped to Songshan. After that, Hong Taiji surrounded this city as well. As further support failed to materialize, the defenders kept the besiegers at a distance with their artillery but could not repel them. After 6 months, hunger forced them to surrender. Hong Taiji had clearly demonstrated that his new army had mastered both siege warfare and the use of Western artillery. In less than 15 years, he had turned the weak points of his troops into their greatest strengths. He made his father's army, which had repeatedly had a rough time against the Ming fortresses, into a military machine that could take on the greatest military power in Asia. After the Battle of Songjin, the Qing pushed further south until they had conquered almost all of China. When the last Ming pretender was captured and executed in 1662, resistance was few and far between. One of those still fighting for the Ming cause was the general and pirate Koxinga. Under pressure from the Qing advance, he fled to Taiwan, seized the island from the Dutch colonialists in the staggering siege of Fort Zeelandia, and founded the kingdom of Tangning, from which he planned to reconquer China. His sons continued his legacy until Taiwan fell in 1683, and even this last spark of resistance died out.